Siddha Kale Natmin Vindati. In this world, there is nothing so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. Such knowledge is the mature fruit of all mysticism. Enjoys this knowledge within himself in due course of time. With these words, I welcome you all again in this prestigious conference, and now I request and thanks Professor N. Kishore from Electrical Engineering Department, IIT Kharagpur, for chair the session. Professor. Hello, hello.
As Bhaktivedanta people would say, and good morning to all of you, to the second day of this conference on science and spirituality. And we are about to begin the session on spirituality in the lives of modern scientists. Today, if you see, electricity has become third most important commodity, only next after air and water. And we all owe our thanks, obligations, and the presence of electricity in such a large manner in our lives to Michael Faraday. Now, Professor Abhindra Ghosh will be talking about the Faraday and man of his religious and ethics, which we perhaps as scientists and engineers do not know much about it. Now let me introduce Dr. Abhindra Ghosh. He obtained his BE from the famous BE college affiliated to University of Calcutta, now known as Indian Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology. Subsequently, he earned a Doctor of Science from the number one institution in the world, MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. If I expand, many people may not know. If I say abbreviate, people may immediately recognize. And then he had a small stint at University of Ohio State University, USA, as research associate till 64, when he joined on the faculty of IIT Kanpur in the Department of Materials and Metallurgical Engineering, from where he retired in the year 2002 as a professor. He did visit MIT, Imperial College during this period, sometimes on sabbatical, and he also been visiting scientist at the Metallurgical and Engineering Consultants, Ranchi, as metallurgical advisor. He is associated with the Tata Research Development and Design Center at Pune and Tata Steel as visiting scientist. He has guided several research students. Notable contributions are 6 books and 100 original research publications in reviewed journals. He has delivered several invited lectures and reviewed large number of papers published in conference proceedings. Over the last 3 decades, his principal interest has been theory of metallurgical process in iron making and steel making. As engineers and scientists, we know how large a role steel makes in our lives. In these endeavors, Professor Ghosh had significant interaction with industry. besides application of metallurgical fundamentals. This includes R&D activities together with steel plants. Professor Ghosh served as a member of or an advisor for many professional activities, including editorial work. He is a life fellow of Indian Institute of Metals and Institution of Engineers, India, and he was invited by the Indian Institute of Metals to deliver the prestigious N.P. Gandhi Memorial Lecture and was also elected as a fellow of Indian National Academy of Engineering. He has been conferred honorary membership Indian Institute of Metals for distinguished services and significant contributions to the metallurgical profession, education and research. We are pleased to have you here, sir, and you will be talking about a eminent scientist, Michael Faraday. You are welcome to this session on the spirituality in the lives of modern scientists. The second speaker will be Dr. Sandeep Kumar. He will be talking about the scientists in the area of mathematics. He is a professor of mechanical engineering with the newly formed IIT BHU, Varanasi, otherwise all along known as BHU IT, which would have been probably one of the mother institutions for many of us, IITs. His field of interest is computational mechanics. He worked in computer-aided design, finite element method, meshless methods, chaos theory. Currently, he is working on wavelets. He has guided several PhDs and several students are working with me. He has worked on projects of national importance with the Department of Atomic Energy and published several papers in international journals and delivered many lectures on wavelets and all over the country and other places. Now you all know, as scientists and engineers, mathematics plays a large role. Mathematics is lingua franca of engineers. And he is going to talk about mathematics and scientists in mathematics and their spirituality. We welcome you here, sir, to this session. We look forward to your lecture. And with this, I request Professor Ghosh to deliver his lecture on Man of Science, Man of God, Michael Faraday.
I thank the organizers for inviting me to give this talk. My respects to Srila Prabhupada and Dr. T.D. Singh. So with that, first some figures will be So next, this was Michael Faraday, and he belonged to the Sandemanian Church. So the church in his hometown, Sandemanian Church, his father Joseph was a blacksmith, so it is his father. Next, now he joined as bookbinders, bookbinding work, and that shows he is binding books, this side. Then his life changed after he attended Humphrey Davy's lecture. So here is Humphrey Davy giving lecture, and the one American philanthropist started the Royal Institution in London. It is not Royal Society, Royal Institution in London, and where Humphrey Davy was professor of chemistry, and this shows the Royal Institution, London. Next. So, after joining Royal Institution, Faraday travelled with Sir Humphrey Davy to France, etc. And there Humphrey Davy made some discoveries. Discoveries of Sir Humphrey Davy, 1813 to 60. He discovered a new element, iodine. Then he found that diamond and carbon are the same material with a different structure. Then, along with Faraday, they developed this safety lamp for the miners. So I'll talk about that. Now, let me come to the Michael Faraday has been one amongst the greatest experimental scientists born so far. His scientific contributions were both in chemistry and physics. It is Faraday's pioneering research which made electricity a branch of physics in its own right and led to large-scale generation, transmission and use of electricity in a variety of applications that you see. He was also involved in several activities on application of scientific findings for benefit of society and mankind. Faraday's mind was so agile and his thoughts so intense that it is hard for us to keep up with him. Frequently, he used to think of several topics at a time: chemical analysis, electric research, industrial projects, and public affairs. As a person, he was social, highly ethical, and deeply religious. Faraday himself wrote several books. Many books have been written on him and his work by others. I have noted some of them in the reference section. For writing the present paper, I have collected the necessary materials primarily from the comprehensive text Faraday, Physics and Faith by Colin A. Russell, Oxford University Press, Oxford. Now, Faraday's family roots of Faraday's are in the northerly part of Lancashire in northern England, far away from London. It has an inhospitable climate and rough, hilly terrain. His father, James Faraday, was a blacksmith. His mother, Margaret, worked as a maid in the farmhouse. Life was tough, requiring dogged persistence for survival. This trait was in Michael, who used to work for long hours in laboratory in the face of difficulties. Church of England was the officially patronized church. Near the local Church of England, there was a chapel belonging to the local members of a small Christian group known as Sandemanians, after the founder Robert Sandeman. This chapel was the spiritual home of Faraday families. Throughout the 18th century, some religious revival was going on in England. Many common people had respect for the Bible as the God's word. and its preachings of high ethics, which they recognized as a greater authority than the traditions of the established churches. They did not like the union of church and state, as in Church of England, and were known as non-conformists or dissenters. Sandemanians belong to this category. Michael embraced the faith of his father and uncle. Michael was the third child of James and Margaret. Before his birth, the family migrated to London for better business prospects. James joined a Sandemanian congregation in the old city of London, set up his smithy shop in a suburban village of Surrey. They lived in rooms adjacent to the shop, and Michael was born there on September 22, 1791. Then next topic is bookbinder's apprentice. Faraday's early education was little more than rudiments of reading, writing and arithmetic at a common day school. The health of his father was deteriorating and the family was in dire economic crisis. So as soon as Faraday was old enough, he was sent to work for a bookseller and bookbinder, Ribau's bookshop. He was hired for delivering newspaper, but he impressed his employer soon because of his hard-working nature and amiable manners. Within a year, he was accepted as an apprentice for bookbinding. James Faraday, Faraday's father, died in 1810. Michael's brother got a job as laborer in the coal gas industry. His elder sister also got married. At Sandemanians, they viewed the hardships as God's blessings. Under care of a loving and competent mother, family happiness prevailed. Many books which Faraday has bound survived even up to 20th century, thus demonstrating his skill and sincerity. However, he was very much dissatisfied and longed for knowledge contained in books. Eventually, he was allowed to read books. The next topic is with Humphrey Davy. Sir Humphrey Davy, the famous chemist, had done chemical research of fundamental importance. He united chemistry and electricity as electrochemistry. Practical outcome was isolation of some new and reactive metals, such as potassium, sodium, calcium, etc., by electrolysis in molten salts, electrolyte, at high temperature. An American amateur scientist, Count Benjamin Rumford, founded the Royal Institution of London in 1799 with the intention of spreading scientific knowledge in the society. Davy was a professor in the institution. He was delivering lectures on the elements of chemical philosophy at the auditorium of the Royal Institution. He was a popular lecturer, and the auditorium with sitting capacity of about 900 used to be full. The last 4 lectures were delivered in February 1812. The topic was radiant matter. Yet that night, high up in the topmost gallery, sitting away from fathers, was young Michael Faraday, who was from a poor family. His bookbinding had impressed a customer to the bookshop, who arranged tickets to Faraday. Faraday took profuse notes of the lecture and then worked hard at following nights to prepare a comprehensive monograph of 345 pages. Davy demonstrated experiments during lecture. Faraday prepared and included sketches of the same in the monograph and then beautifully bound it. This impressed Davy. So when Faraday approached him for a job in the Royal Institution, Davy readily agreed and earned a job of laboratory assistant. Faraday left bookbinding and joined the Royal Institution in 1813. 6 weeks after engaging Faraday, Davy decided for a change in his life He resigned from the professorship of the Royal Institution and became an honorary professor. William Brandes succeeded as professor of chemistry and started supervising Faraday. Davy decided to go to France with his wife, Lady Jane, to study volcano. He wanted Faraday to accompany him. At the last moment, Davy's servant declined to travel, so this responsibility also fell on Faraday. They started in October 1813 and reached Paris. Davy carried with him a small laboratory with chemicals and glassware and set up a laboratory in his hotel room. At Paris, they had conversations with famous scientists like Gallus, Ampere, etc. Corot had discovered a dark crystalline solid which vaporized easily. Davy's experiments pointed out that it was a new element and he christened it as iodine. Then they traveled to southern France, coastal France, then to Italy. Faraday was scrupulously observing everything and making notes. They met Volta, etc. in Italy. Davy made some discoveries at Italy, which included his finding that diamond was nothing but a form of carbon. Finally, they returned to London in April 1815. After his return to London, Faraday was reappointed at the Royal Institution at a higher salary as assistant and superintendent of apparatus. He was also provided with decent accommodation at the top floor of the institution, where there were few disturbances. This cemented his association with the Royal Institution for 40 years. He was provided with all facilities for research, as well as freedom and relief from teaching. He had the opportunity of Davy's guidance for few more years, after which they fell out. During this period, a major work was invention for safety lamp for coal miners. We have shown you the figure of the safety lamp. Inside the mines, concentration of methane gas was sometimes becoming high, so high that ordinary lights used to ignite the gas, causing fire due to combustion of methane. The safety lamp had fine wire mesh screen around the glass encasement. This led to dissipation of heat and did not allow the temperature around the lamp to go above the ignition point. Further work on chemistry by Faraday. This slide, you may show the next one. Next figure. So further work by early work on chemistry and chemical research. So further work by Faraday. Even after the end of his active association with Davy, Faraday continued with chemical research and other activities in chemistry up till about 1830-31. These were his primary occupation. Then his interest in electricity and electromagnetism became his primary fields of activity, with chemistry occupying minor part. Two important events in Faraday's life during this period are worth noting. He married Sarah Bernard in June 1821. She was also a member of St. Emmanuel Congregation. In 1825, he was made the director of laboratory in the Royal Institution. Chemistry by 1815 was a subject in a state of flux. The earlier chemical revolution was associated with the work of Antoine Lavoisier and then Dalton's atomic theory. The second chemical revolution came with a large-scale application of chemistry for industrial processing of material. Davy employed electrolysis to isolate some reactive elements. It was followed by the work of J. Berzelius of Sweden. By 1815, about 50 elements were known. After Faraday fell out with Davy, Faraday's early work on chemistry and chemical research may be summed up as follows. It's shown here, work on ores, metals and alloys, analysis as well as preparation of new alloys both. Trying to make good alloys, including woods, whose manufacturing was known to only specialists in South India, helping William Brandy with his lectures as well as editing the Journal of Science and Art. From 1821 to 22, Faraday started to take interest in the then infant science of organic chemistry. And next one, organic chemistry. And prepared iodine counterpart of dichloroethane. Another area of interest was what was then known as pneumatic chemistry. It was concerned with liquefaction of gases by application of pressure. Starting with chlorine gas, he succeeded in liquefaction of some gases. He also recognized that liquefaction is impossible above a critical temperature. Whale oil was employed for street lighting in London. For this purpose, the oil was heated until it decomposed into many gaseous products. Faraday gradually heated the oil in Lally for fractional distillation and condensed each product, analyzed them. This led to discovery of benzene, isobutylene, etc. So benzene is shown, discovery of benzene. Discovery of benzene, isobutylene. It was admirable that a simple and crude apparatus he could find this. Coal gas was another form of fuel employed, and Faraday also carried out fractional distillation and identified some products. During this period, he also gave lectures and discourses on diverse topics, primarily on chemistry. He established the practice of demonstration with skillful experiment, which made his lectures very interesting. Gradually, his lectures became so popular that the auditorium of the Royal Institution had audience ranging from 500 to 1,000. He also initiated series of popular lectures on science. Now I come to Faraday as physicist. So Faraday as chemist, I go to Faraday as physicist. From the 17th century itself, scattered experiments on static electricity was going on, including generation of electricity. In 1791 in Italy, Galvani accidentally discovered that when a dead frog pinned to the board by a metallic pin was touched by another metal, its muscles twitched. That was the beginning of current electricity. Later, Volta ascribed it to action by contact of two dissimilar metals with a moist substance at the same time. He constructed battery and obtained electric current. Soon to English scientists Nicholson and Carlyle showed the decomposition. Yeah, I will require some more time. Shown to showed decomposition. Intrigued by reports of scattered experiments on electricity, with great difficulty, Faraday constructed a Leyden jar and electric generator, even when he was working the bookbinding shop. So this next figure shows this is the Leyden jar. Research on electromagnetism. William Gilbert around 1600 AD showed that the earth was a magnet By 18th century, Coulomb showed that the force between magnetic poles was inversely proportional to the square of distance between them. Around 1820, Oersted demonstrated deflection of a magnetic needle by passing current through a nearby wire. He speculated that the cause might be some kind of a circular force around the current carrying wire. Ampere showed that if electric current was passed through the two parallel wires, they either attract or repel one another depending on their relative direction. In 1821, Faraday made a series of experiments on interaction of current carrying wire and magnet. He repeated experiments of Ampere, etc. Faraday's apparatus consists of mercury pool in two glass jars. Metallic wires are easily supported from a top flat to other end of simple mercury pool. Electric circuits are completing by connecting metallic wires with mercury. Each pool had a bar magnet immersed into it. In one pool, it's not shown here. So, each pool had a bar magnet. One pool, the magnet was fixed. At the end of the wire was loosely hanging. Passing of current, the wire rotate around the market. Wire rotating around the other pool, end of wire was fixed, but the magnet was loosely immersed. Passing of current made the magnet rotate around the wire. Then there was a gap of 10 years in Faraday's research on electromagnetism. He came back to it in August 1831, conducted a key experiment to separate wires were wound on a soft iron ring. When current was switched on or off in one coil by connecting disconnecting battery, the magnetic needle near the other coil momentarily got kicked. Then it settled down to original position. Then a change of current in the first circuit affected magnetism in the iron ring. This was already known. What was new was that such change in magnetism caused momentary flow of current in second circuit. This is what is shown, his apparatus. This was the first documentary evidence of electromagnetic induction. A month later, Faraday carried out another set of ingenious experiments to demonstrate, even without passing any electric current, that movement of a magnet near a coil of wire wound around a soft iron rod induced electric current in the coil. Hence, electricity was obtained from magnetism alone. On the basis of this experiment, Faraday proposed his famous law of electromagnetic induction. Within a few days, Faraday hit upon the idea of a possible method to obtain continuous current. He made a simple arrangement with one end of the circuit connected to a brass axle in which a copper disc could be rotated like a wheel. The other end circuit touched the disc. The disc was placed between two poles of a magnet. And so this thing could be rotated. This was invention of dynamo. With the vast electrical industry came up later on the foundation. Of course, Faraday did not live to see this industrial revolution. Faraday's other contributions on electricity and magnetism. Next one. Toward the end of 1832, Faraday started work on what he called electrochemical decomposition. Through a series of experiments, he established that the extent of electrochemical action depended solely on the quantity of electricity, that is, current into time. He had arrived at what came to be called as Faraday's first law of electrolysis. Near the end of 1833, he began working with electrolysis of a variety of substances. Then he reached another conclusion, known as Faraday's second law of electrolysis. Meanwhile, another fundamental question faced Faraday. For any years, electric effects had been obtained from different sources. So Faraday, where the same electricity, Faraday showed through experiment that the electricity obtained from all sources are the same. The which was now, so the science of electricity was now united into a single new science. Also physics and chemistry came together in another new science known as electrochemistry. Faraday had been concerned with the question of how influence electric or magnetic were actually transmitted. He rejected the then prevailing explanation and he spoke of lines of force and eventually of a magnetic field. His belief in an all-powerful God led him to the idea of point centers and a field around them. The concept of field is basic in modern physics, which all of you know, and has been generalized for energies of all kinds. For example, in quantum mechanics we talk about quantum field. Faraday had a guess that light and magnetism are related. In 1840s, he confirmed it. He superimposed a strong magnetic field on polarized light. This figure is shown in the next one. The rotation of the plane of polarization in the magnetic field is known as Faraday effect. It became the basis of another new science, magneto-optics. Faraday came very close to announcing that light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. This influenced J.C. Maxwell, who later quantitatively proved it. We all know that capacitors are integral components in many electric and electronic circuits. Here also, Faraday made pioneering contributions of great importance. For this, he turned to static electricity. In 1835, he demonstrated that charge in a hollow metallic vessel is confined to the outer circuit. He also showed that capacity of a condenser to some charges depends on the interfering insula and proposed a parameter, dielectric constant. In his honor, unit of capacity is called Farad. After Faraday made another momentous discovery, impulsive photon science, using very powerful magnet. He demonstrated that materials which were not magnetic could also be made to move in the magnetic field. He called such substances as diamagnetic material in contrast to paramagnetic material such as iron. Now, Faraday's participation, next topic, Faraday's participation in industrial and public projects. Faraday had been participating in industrial and public projects. The objectives or application of science in this project. Earlier, he took them up as his own initiative or at request from. I have already mentioned about some of these in early years. After 1830-31, he got involved in research on electricity and his fame spread everywhere. So he was invited from all countries and so on. Faraday, a man of religion and ethics. This is the last topic. I have already, so you may go to the next one. Faraday, a man of religion and ethics. I have already discussed about the religious faith of Faraday's patients and relatives. Even after the death of his father, Faraday continued to attend Sunday prayers at nearby Sandemonium Chapel, where there was family get-together also. His wife Sarah also belonged to the same faith. Faraday was not money-minded. He believed in simple living. He used to be requested for consultation work by various organizations. He was doing this not with any commercial motive. He sought to pursue knowledge for its own sake. In addition, he was deeply concerned to use his science for benefit of his fellow men. He was spending his extra earnings mostly on laboratory as well as donations, charities for well-being of dependents. He never patented his inventions. After 1832, he could have earned much more money if he was money-minded. He even declined the offer of knighthood. He was invited from many other countries to visit and receive honor. However, he did not accept this. He preferred to live simply and maintain his indifference to worldly honors. All these facts paint a consistent picture of a man who paid little attention to worldly ways. From 1838 to 1840, Faraday's health began to fail with symptoms of rheumatism and fatigue, as well as loss of memory. He was forced to take several years of rest. By 1845, he was considerably better and never recovered fully from illness and loss of memory. Even then, he continued to work till 1865, after which he relinquished all these. From 1865, Faraday was so ill that he was confined to chair for the rest of his life. Faraday died on August 25, 1867, and was buried at the Highgate Cemetery in a simple ceremony, attended only by his family and few personal friends. He drew his inner strength from his Christian faith. One crucial outcome of this is Faraday's conviction of a unity in the natural world and the phenomena. Thus, Faraday was typical of many gifted scientists in his synthesis of science and religion. We are talking of synthesis of science and religion now. Acknowledgement. This is an abridged version of the paper published in the Bulletin of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, Kolkata, in July 2014. The author wishes to acknowledge help received from Sri Varun Agarwal of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, Kolkata, who suggested the topic and provided literature without which it was not possible to write this article. Now, we look at this one. Speculations I have none. I am resting on certainties. I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed unto him against that day. Okay. So I am through. And
Thank you, sir. Now, I can allow one or two questions. One or two questions.
You have to remove this.
Hello. And, but before that, I would like request audience to switch off their mobiles. Please switch off your mobiles or keep them in vibrating mode.
Thank you. So shall I? Okay.
Just for information, can you tell us? I don't know.
Should this be taken off now? This one, there is something in my pocket also.
Yeah, you want it to be taken out?
Okay. Do I require it?
Yeah, you would like to answer.
Any question?
Yeah, there is a question to you which says,
Okay, then keep it.
yeah, you can come there, we'll get a hand mic.
I can go there.
Yeah, please come to the chair.
I need
Yeah.
not stand here.
Yeah, you made only a brief reference in passing to.
Just a moment. Hello, just please wait for a minute.
You kindly write the question on the paper. This visual.
Please write the question on a piece of paper and pass it across. And once again, I request that mobiles be off. Yeah, now the first question was, what's the relationship between Maxwell and Faraday?
Hello. Ah. Exactly whether Maxwell was a disciple of Faraday or not, that I do not know. What I know, he was influenced by the Faraday's this suggestion or speculation that light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. And then Faraday did not know any mathematics. His books do not contain a single equation. And Maxwell was a great mathematician. So he mathematically proved that light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. But whether he was a disciple of Faraday or not, this I do not know.
It's like this. As he was telling, Faraday was had not really gone to a school. He was tinkering in a workshop, and then he developed things and learned things by observation without much of a mathematical basis. Whereas Maxwell is one who tried to integrate both electricity and magnetism together, and we have the electromagnetism as it stands today thanks to Maxwell. I hope that answers your question. So that's the reason why we consider the Maxwell as the pioneer of electrodynamics. Professor Vikram Singh, I guess. Any other questions? Yeah, well, yesterday Mr. Varun Agarwal, Swamiji, also mentioned that even in IITs we tend to teach through mathematics. I find that it is easy to teach through mathematics than to talk about physics and then say why the mathematics is there. And well, our next speaker, Dr. Sandeep Kumar, will talk about how supreme being and mathematician's mind are related.
Good morning and Hare Krishna. So, I will try to discuss something on mathematicians' belief and questions like, can by using only mathematics we understand the supreme being, or what should we expect from a mathematician? Can we expect some kind of modeling to explain the desires of supreme being? So it's concentrating more on mathematicians. Johannes Kepler, a great mathematician, said the chief aim of all investigation of the external world should be to discover the rational order and harmony which has been imposed on it by God and which he reveals to us in the language of mathematics. So you find there are many great mathematicians in ancient times, I will say ancient times, who believed in God very firmly. But now you do not find many mathematicians, and they feel that we need not to accept the role of God. Okay. We can simply skip that part. We need not to discuss that. We can put these opinion in two classes, one who believe and one who do not believe. So Hardy said, I believe that mathematical reality lies outside us, that our function is to discover or observe it, and that the theorems which we prove and which we describe grandiloquent as our creations are simply our notes of our observations. This view has been held in one form or another by many philosophers of high reputation from Plato onwards, and I shall use the language which is natural to a man who holds it. So many believes in some kind of supreme being, and they believe that this mathematics is from that supreme being. But there is another class also. In that you have some mathematicians and like Kastner and Newman who express opposite perspective. According to them, it is a man's own handiwork, subject only to the limitations imposed by the laws of thoughts. So you will find mathematicians, but I believe anybody, any psychologist who has seen and understood the work of Ramanujan cannot believe that it is a work of some conscious, subconscious or unconscious mind of human being, because it cannot be done. The equation which he has put, it's just simply impossible. Even by computers also it's very difficult. Now it's by computers also it's very, very difficult. That time they were not having any computers. So he has expressed pi. I didn't write that. I could. So if you see how he has expressed the equation for pi, you cannot believe that any human mind can do the calculation and find the pi. So I also believe that there is some role of supreme being. Now if we see the contribution of mathematics, it's a very exciting. Okay, mathematicians' work is, you can divide it into two parts, active and passive. Mario Livio in his book Is God a Mathematicians give a very good account of work of mathematicians. So he has defined this active and passive formulation. Active means like you are designing some formula based on natural laws, like for example deformation in some rod. Okay, you see this and then you formulate it. Okay, this is something active formulation. And passive formulation means you just do something, without seeing something physical, in a very abstract form. One law, you find something, natural phenomena or something, and then you keep on proving one another. You are not interested in application. It's very abstract, like Hilbert, Hardy, they worked in this area. And the theory of knots, they didn't find any use. They were just thinking something and they are finding one rule and then another rule, or one theorem, another theorem, something like that. Okay, they are not interested in what is the use of this. They are just finding some rule of game. So this active mathematics is not very surprising, because you know the physical laws and you are putting mathematics in that. So you don't find it very exciting, what is this? You're seeing the law and then something, some calculus, some addition, some subtraction. But the passive mathematics is something very interesting, that you do not see the things, but you design. Okay, you design something and then you find it's a great application. For example, the work of Hardy, he said he is a pure mathematician and he doesn't care about the application, and he was just doing something. Okay, and later we found a lot of application was found on his theorems, number theory. even the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is pure maths, and then he found the application explaining the wave particle duality. There is no relation, somebody, or in fact he proved the theorem, and then he found the application. You can say it's not that he saw the duality and then he tried to explain it using some mathematical formulation. And another is knot theory, which is used in demystifying the DNA structure, is another. Knot, how they form the knot, and they try to understand the topology of the knot. So later they found that it's very much related with the DNA. It's not that DNA they try to see and understand it using something. They were doing something with the knot theory, which was a pure maths, and then they found the application. So it's very interesting to see the passive part. So it means that there is some game, rule of games which is working. And you see that is some rules which I will say the great mathematicians, they observe something and they try to generalize it. They are very smartly or very intelligently, they generalize it, and the intelligent people, after getting some very basic thing, they try to follow the steps, and then they get the next level. So the clicks occur in some great mind. They see something very common and then they try to generalize it very smartly, and then they form some basic rules, and then other mathematicians, they keep on generalizing it or getting one theorem after the other theorem. And there are some great researchers, they find the application in some places. For example, Haar developed this concept in 1910, and some 30 years ago, Mayer found its application in quantum mechanics. Now, wavelet has become a very hot topic nowadays. So, Haar that time developed something, without seeing the application. He developed some concept, and then again you can say abstract form he developed, and Mayer found, who was working on quantum theory and wanted some relation between time and frequency, he found it very useful. So you see that mathematics is basically some rules. Okay, it has rules of game, you can say, and it doesn't care about the application. It doesn't care. For example, concept of potential energy can be proved by pure mathematics. Use concept of weighted residual, then Galerkin, and then symmetry, and then you will get the potential energy concept. So it's from very pure mathematics, but then in that pure mathematics you will not get any physical feeling. To get the physical feeling, you have to see the physical world, that's all. Otherwise something is happening in a very abstract form. Something is happening in very abstract form, and this something is some rules. Okay, the rules are there in a very abstract form, and then you find, when you see the physical thing, and then you find that that particular rule is applicable here. So this is what mathematics I find. But you find that there are many mathematicians who believe, and many mathematicians who do not believe in God. So this my observation is that, see, the mathematics demands hard work and very strict discipline. You have to follow the rules, strictly follow the rules. You cannot manipulate the things. If you have the tendency to manipulate, don't become mathematicians. You cannot become mathematicians. You just strictly follow the rules. And if you are doing hard work and strictly following the rules, then success is guaranteed. Okay. So there is no need to believe on God. There is some rules, one after the other. You are very carefully following the rules. You are getting the theorems. You need not to believe on God. As if you are honest, that's good enough. If you are hard worker and honest, you need not to believe. But there are, I believe, some lazy, crazy people. To them, the solution just clicks. Okay, they do not know how it's coming solution. I say lazy, crazy because they love, some kind of. They are not very hard worker. They just crazy. They want to do something very unique, but not very systematic, very hard worker. They are just thinking, enjoying, and then suddenly something will click. So they don't find any reason for success and failure. They just believe in God. It's God giving. This is what I believe. Suddenly you get some solution and then you don't find, how I got this solution. I was not thinking. You believe that this is a God. Oh, sorry. The another aspect is like we discussed, Dr. Professor Muller discussed on Gödel's theorem. I am also using this. Of course, I am not expert. I know little bit, means this much only. So Gödel's theorem is that any consistent formal system S within which a certain amount of elementary arithmetic can be derived out is incomplete with regards to statements of elementary arithmetic. There are such statements which can neither be proved nor disproved in S. The another says, for any consistent formal system S within which a certain amount of elementary arithmetic can be carried out, the consistency of S cannot be proved in S itself. So I was talking to my friends and I was trying to convince something on God, and he was not easy person to be convinced. So I just made some model. I found that this Gödel's theorem fits very well in that model. I will discuss that. So before that, I just want to tell you what exactly I want to do is, my question is, can we start from the very fundamental mathematics and find the absolute truth? So next few slides, I will focus on that. Just by understanding mathematics, can we understand the supreme being? So I don't believe in that, and this is what I am using the Gödel's theorem also here. So I made this chart where I am showing the mathematical model, the bottom, and then scientific laws, matter, living being, and absolute truth. So I am applying this Gödel's theorem in mathematical model. It says that any consistent formal system as within which a certain amount of elementary arithmetic can be derived out is incomplete with regards to statement of elementary arithmetic. There are such statements which can neither be proved or not disproved in S. So according to Gödel's theorem, we cannot prove the God only using mathematical model, and this is what I also believe. Why? Because if you see only the mathematical model, suppose I am only in the mathematical domain, can I prove the physical laws, scientific laws like gravitational force, magnetic force? Can I prove it? If I am living only in the axioms, theorems, some numbers, can I prove that? The answer is no. You have to see the gravitational force, you have to observe. So it means that you cannot just move to the next level. If you are in one level, say in the scientific laws, you have laws, physical laws like gravitational force, other quantum forces, quantum mechanics forces, laws, thermodynamics laws. Can you say there exists some matter like gold or oxygen? Means you are keeping only in your mind something, only laws. You cannot prove that there exists oxygen. So it means that you cannot go up. You have to come to this level. This is what I find in Gödel's theorem. Now, if you are in the living matter, you have every matters, oxygen, nitrogen, or whatever, gold. Can you say that there exists a living being? No, you cannot, because even if it does, you cannot say the person is dead or alive. You cannot differentiate. It's very difficult to find the difference. If you are only in the living matter, if your mind is only in living matter, you don't have the concept, any other concept of life forces, which we call soul. You cannot prove. So there something is missing. There's missing links are there. You have to go to the another domain. That's what I find. So similarly, you cannot prove the absolute truth also, the supreme being also. You have to go to this level. If you are living in this domain, you cannot say that there exists a supreme being. There is a scripture. There are some realized souls who have some connection. They only can guide you, and then you try that, test it. If you find it, you believe it. If you don't find it, just leave it. Okay. So this is what I find the application of Gödel's theorem in my model. I just wrote some philosophical thing that what is the connection between these things. I say that supreme being enjoys with living being, with human beings. And I say, I believe that life uses matter. This is a fact. All life uses the matter. Living being, we are made of matter only. We enjoy the matter. And matter feels laws. This is also truth. It feels the quantum mechanics law, gravitational law, all this. And the law knows mathematics, because law never violates the rule of mathematics. So, but there is a lot of limitations of mathematics. There is another side also of mathematics. One thing is that we cannot, or according to me, we cannot understand the supreme being, go upward, just if we are living only in the domain of mathematics. We also find some limitation in mathematics. Say, we are not able to define, or rather do a very good calculation if there is a non-linearity involved. And also if there is a free will, then we completely fail on that. We are successful only very partially if the free will is there, some statistical method we apply. And in case of non-linearity also, but if you see the nature, everything is non-linear. Our growth is non-linear, trees' growth is non-linear. You don't find anything which is linear. Linear is just a simplified assumption. So even Einstein has said that the true laws of nature cannot be linear. And the Heisenberg also says the similar thing. The progress of physics will to a large extent depends on the progress of non-linear mathematics or methods to solve non-linear equations. So it means that we cannot really solve even the real physical world problem perfectly using mathematics. Now, at present we cannot, because all our spaces which we use generally are linear spaces. Now, there are some mathematicians who feel that mathematics is everything. There is another interesting part. They have so much faith on mathematics, they say that mathematics is everything. And one of them is Max Tegmark of MIT. He argues that our universe is not just described by mathematics, it is mathematics. So they have so much faith. It's just like somebody has faith on God. According to his mathematical universe hypothesis, physical reality is mathematical structure. And there is another mathematician there are many mathematicians. I know one Professor Jane Shrestha who also believe in it. He presented in his book some very good logic, and which is published or which is going to be published by Bhaktivedanta Institute. I will take the opinion of Professor Jane Shrestha, which I find it very interesting. In his book, he created some axioms, sets and heuristic theorem, and defined supreme being and nature, life and soul. He used, and there are some other things are also there. He tried to explain the quantum mechanics phenomena, which are very difficult even to quantum physics to explain. He compared his theories with the other some 8-10 theories which are existing on the quantum mechanics, because they are not able to understand how this is working, so they gave many theories, and Professor Jane Shrestha also gave, and he talked about the Western philosophy also. So, why we are interested in mathematics, particularly why I am interested, because there is a lot of confusion about the supreme being. So, if mathematicians say something about the God or his desires, then it will end all our confusion. If we say something with the help of theorems or proof, then there will be no confusion. Otherwise, there is a lot of confusion. You find some confusion. Yeah, or just a few minutes. So the question is, can we put everything in concrete mathematical logics to avoid confusion, misinterpretation, and understand desires of supreme being? So Professor Shrestha, he defined the divine with the help of null set, that is Shunya. He defined the divine with the help of null set. Null set means the total empty. Okay. When he says that Shunya, it does not mean that nothing. It means that there is something which we are not able to understand. And then he compares this Shunya with these other philosophies. He says that Shunya means you have to end all your physical, all our material desires. We have to finish all our material desires. So then we will reach to the Shunya, and then we will be able to understand the mystery of that Shunya. That's how he has defined. There's one thing is that he says that because Shunya is common in all set, so divine is common in all of us. And then he defines Shunya in his way. This is very interesting. And then he finds from Isha Upanishad the shlok, Om Purnamidam Purnamada, etc. The meaning is that the divine is complete, the divine is so the divine is complete there, complete here, and from complete only complete emerges. If from the complete is taken out, then only the complete remains. So this is valid for Shunya only, the null space only. If you see this is very much valid in Shunya. So he finds that there is a very good link between the Shunya and this shlok, which is from Isha Upanishad. And so I find it this book is quite interesting. Now, I believe that if we want to understand a deeper truth, if we get some theory, it's good. Like Abdul Salam has said, you can observe a thing or not depends on theory which you use. It is a theory which decides what can be observed. So in fact, if we get some mathematical model, a good model like Dr. Shrestha has worked, it will be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, for a nice talk on God being as seen by mathematicians. Okay, so we can take one or two questions. I know we are a little late for the next session, but still could take one or two questions. Send the mic there. It would be good if you identify yourself and then ask the question.
Thank you, sir. I'm Professor Sarada Ningthausam from Regional Institute of Medical Sciences, Imphal. I am a professor in physiology. Sir, thank you for the wonderful presentation. So, if mathematics can explain almost everything about the external world, I wish to know if there is a relationship between mathematics and our intuition. Thank you, sir.
Actually, so far we are, Dr. Jain also tried to model something using mathematics, and he tried to say life and the soul, the divine, but the intuition he has not gone, and it's a very difficult. I don't think that we can jump to that level. We have to first prove at the very basic level. So living forces. So we have not gone to that level.
Professor Kumar, it was a nice talk. I got a small query on your talk. Suppose if we don't understand something, there are so many varieties in this universe, and we are a small being, we have very limited knowledge. So if we don't understand something, how does mathematics support us to understand and to go to that point?
No, this is what the passive mathematics does. It gives some rules. Like for example, knot. The people started understanding how the knot is working, what is the topology, how they are connected, what the two knots, how they are similar or dissimilar. So they were just working on knot theories, knots, normal knots you tie in the rope and all. And they keep on developing some theories in understanding. And just for fun, they are doing it for fun, you can say that they were crazy. And then later, when the people found DNA, and then they tried to understand it, they found that it has a very good application in this knot theory. So it means that there is some rule. The rule is something like a universal rule. You understand it, you don't understand, it doesn't matter. But as a physicist, we say that if we find that rule is applied in this particular place, we find it very exciting. So mathematics is giving only the rules. I hope I have given you answer.
Okay.
Please.
No, actually we are taught those things. It's not intuitive, because even if you see the child, we teach 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, and we give many examples. 1 flower plus 1 flower is equal to 2 flower, 1 cat plus 1 cat is equal to 2 cats, and this way we keep on teaching. So we teach slowly by giving a lot of examples. Child forgets all these examples and keeps the rules. So basically in mathematics we are keeping the rules in our mind. So when you ask child 1 plus 1, even though he doesn't care what is 1 and what is another one, he just says that if similar kind of things are there, it means that 2. So we give the training of rules. So there is nothing like intuition. Of course, the God's intuition, I am talking something different, but minds basically, if you see, it generally captures rules only, and then it applies that. Mind captures some facts and rules, and it applies. That's how the expert system logic,
but the rules could be intuitive, right? The rules could be,
rules they just observe and they frame it. It's not intuitive. Intuitive means there's something coming from God. It's something I cannot explain.
Or something
but generally we frame the rules.
Okay.
With our experience, by listening, by something, we frame the rules and we just follow the rules.
A child at the age of 2, I think, is potentially a brilliant mathematician. Don't you think so? A child at the age of 1 or 2 is potentially a good mathematician. It's only later distractions that change his interests and so on. I think counting comes very early in a child's development.
We teach them. It's not that
We
they
teach them.
Yeah.
Okay.
We teach them.
This question from Professor Ghosh here.
From a spiritual point of view, the okay. From a spiritual point of view, we had Sophocles, that is, who, like Kailan Goswami, Sri Ram Krishna, who attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and they directly experienced what is Nirgun Brahma. Now, Sri Ram Krishna, after he came out of the Samadhi, was asked, what is there? He said, sound, sapta. Life is vibrating. So, the Nirgun Brahma event is not a dead thing. There is life vibrating. It's full of the whole universe is full of life. Life vibrating. It's a living universe, in other words. So that's what I want to.
Okay.
Those who had the Vikalpa Samadhi, only they could go to that.
Okay, he's talking some Indian spiritual concept, talking about the Ramakrishna Paramhans, and he's telling the Supreme Being, how we go to the Supreme Being. Okay, so I think I will stop here.
So we thank Professor Ghosh and Professor Kumar for the nice presentations where they talked about scientists' life and their religion and ethics in scientists' lives. And Professor Ghosh nicely brought out the origin of electrochemistry and electricity in physics through Michael Faraday, which gave birth to the new area of electrical engineering as we see today. And it's inevitable to have electricity in our life. And Professor Kumar has really brought out how we have a only flow in one direction from ultimate reality to the mathematical model, but we cannot go back from mathematical model to the ultimate reality. So we must thank both the speakers for enlightening us. And no doubt, I only recall one statement which I heard from a Air Force scientist from USA who was talking about the aircraft protection from lightning, and they protect for 0.0001% probability of lightning strike. Still, somebody asked him, what happens if the lightning strikes the cockpit? He said, God save the pilot.
Thank you very much, speakers and session chair. May I now request from Professor Kishore to kindly present the memento to our distinguished speakers. May I now request Professor K.K. Singh from NIFT Ranchi to present the memento to our session chair. Thank you very much all.